it's me, Amy Rebecca, your internet bestie for all things personal development, intentional living and dream chasing. And today we're going to be doing a deep dive into habits. Habits are the minions that run our lives, and if we're in control of them, then they can do incredible things for us. But if we're not mindful and we don't stay on top of them, then they can take us down a path we might not want to go down. They can make or break us, really. As many of you know, I'm on a mission to create my dream life and become the best version of myself. So over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of research on habits, and I've started implementing different techniques and things that I've read about. And today I'm going to share the ins and the outs, absolutely everything you need to know about habits and how to make them work for you. Are you ready? Let's do it. So the first question you might be asking is, what actually is a habit and why should I care? Habits are small daily actions that you have repeated enough times that they've become automatic. You don't think, you just do. And in a lot of ways, habits are great. I mean, imagine if we didn't have any habits and you had to stop and make a conscious decision about every movement you made, every thought that you had, every action that you took. We would never get anything done. Habits are a way that our brains streamline our daily lives and help to reduce the mental load, because here's the thing about our brains. They don't like to exert that much effort. They like to conserve energy. They like to make things easy as often as possible, which is pretty relatable, honestly. Anyway, the thing about habits is that yes, they are small, but they are powerful. At this point, I guess most of us have heard that analogy. It's in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. By the way, I'm going to be referencing a few books in this video. I will link all of them down below, as well as a few extras that I think are just top notch. Anyway, the analogy goes that if a plane takes off from LA and adjusts its heading just 3.5 degrees, then it's going to land in Washington, DC instead of New York. And that just highlights how something so small and seemingly insignificant can completely change the trajectory of your life over time. And that's the key thing, right? It's over time. Like if you go to the gym today and you get in a good workout, awesome, I love that for you. But if you do not go to the gym again for the rest of the year, then that one workout, it's not going to have any real lasting impact. Whereas if you work out regularly, week in, week out, every week until the end of the year, you're going to notice some pretty drastic changes. And habits are pretty much the cornerstone of all of the changes that we make in our life, because I've read anywhere from 40% to 90% of the actions that we take and the things that we do and the thoughts that we have as we move about our daily life are habitual. They're not conscious decisions that we make. We're running on autopilot a huge amount of the time. So if our habits are good habits, then eventually with time we will be moving in the right direction towards our goals, towards the things that we want to achieve. But if we have bad habits and we let them go unchecked, then either we're not going to be making that progress and moving towards where we want to go, or worse, we're going to be heading in the wrong direction towards things that we don't want. So with all of that said, let's start chatting about some actionable steps that you can start putting in place to create long-lasting, sustainable habits. Number one, you've got to get clear on your why. I talked about this in my video about how I got in the best shape of your life, but whenever you're trying to make any kind of change, you need to start by taking a step back and figuring out what you're actually trying to achieve. What are you trying to do here? What is motivating you? What is the end game? Because sometimes it's really easy to focus so much of your energy and your attention onto the habit that you're trying to create instead of the outcome that you're trying to achieve by doing that habit. And when that happens, a lot of the time you can make things harder for yourself than it needs to be, or you can end up working on habits that actually don't serve you in the long run. Okay, so for example, you could say, I want to build a habit of waking up at 6 a.m. every morning. Cool, why? Like maybe there's a workout class that you want to start that runs at that time, or maybe you want to leave for work earlier in the morning so that you miss the rush hour traffic, or maybe you want to get up a little bit earlier so you have time to read a book or meditate or do yoga. There are plenty of reasons why you might want to build that habit, but you need to know what your why is, and there are two main reasons for that. Number one, your why is like your power bank. Your why is what is going to keep you going when motivation runs out. And let me tell you friends, motivation will run out. Motivation is not going to hold your hand and guide you through the entire process of making change. Motivation is like that flaky friend who's really fun to be around, but you can't rely on them to be there when you need them. And number two, it's really important to assess whether this new habit that you're trying to build is actually relevant or is actually necessary to you and your life. Something about me is that I love watching the That Girl videos on social media. I am just fascinated by these girls who wake up, they're so glamorous, they get up at 5 a.m, they go to the gym, they do their meditation, they come back, they make an acai bowl, they write a gratitude list, they like do a hair mask, they do the full 8-step skincare routine, then they have a smoothie, then they have their matcha latte, all before 8 a.m. How are they doing this? But what I hate about this kind of content is it's very formulaic, and we see a lot of the same habits and routines cropping up in these videos over and over again. And it can kind of lead to this idea that there's a set tick list of habits or actions that you need to take in order to feel fulfilled or happy or cool. I don't know. My point is, when you are trying to implement change, you need to know your why, and your why needs to resonate with you. It needs to fit with your interests and your lifestyle and the things that are important to you. It's not about emulating things that you see people on social media doing just because they look happy or they look like they've got it together. Your why is so important, so you need to get clear on it, you need to resonate with it, and it needs to work for you. And once you know your why and what you're actually trying to achieve, then you decide which habits are going to get you there, not the other way around. My second tip for building habits is to use rewards. Habits stick because we get something out of them. You get home from work, you reach for a bag of Doritos, they taste good. Your alarm clock goes in the morning, you hit snooze, you get to stay in bed. People drink and take drugs and gamble because they get that hit of dopamine. And really, when we look at a lot of our habits, they're so counterintuitive because we know they're dragging us away from our goals and they're turning us into the kinds of people that we don't want to be. And ultimately, depending on the habit, they can cause us a lot of harm and major issues in our lives, and we continue to do them because there's instant gratification. And this is how habits are formed. Basically, our brains love rewards. When they're rewarded for something, they're going to want to do it again, and then eventually it will become ingrained, it becomes a habit. So James Clear in Atomic Habits and Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit, they have slightly different models for habit formations and how habits come to be. The basis of them is very similar. For this video, we're going to be leaning into Charles Duhigg's model because it's just a little bit simpler. So to create a habit, you need a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue is the signal to your brain that it's time to do a specific action. The routine is that action, and the reward is the reward. So for example, the cue is that your alarm clock goes in the morning, the routine is that you hit snooze, and the reward is that you get to stay snuggled up in bed and you don't have to get out into the cold, miserable world. So what we need to do if we want to build new habits or change the habits that we already have is that we need to start rewarding ourselves for doing the things that we want to keep doing. For instance, when I decided that I wanted to become a morning person, and many of you will remember and know that I was never that girl, dragging myself out of bed at like 10 a.m. and struggling. And now I get up at sometimes 5:30, usually 6, and I head to the gym. Who is she? How did this happen? Habits is how it happened. So what I did was I switched up that habit loop using a new action and a new reward. So when my alarm clock would go, instead of hitting snooze, I would immediately get out of bed, and my reward for that would be a cup of coffee, because I will do anything for a cup of coffee. So when you are starting to think about what habits you want to build, use the habit loop as your guide. Decide on your cue what is going to be the signal to your brain that it is time to do the action. It could be a time of day, it could be when something specific happens, it could be when you feel a certain way. Then you're going to decide on the routine, that is the actual action itself, and then the important part is that you need to have a reward lined up. Are we bribing our brains like they're toddlers who won't put their socks on in the supermarket? Yes, we are. But we want to create that sense of instant gratification, because knowing that something is good for us in the long term is not enough to motivate us, and it's not enough to get our brains on board. Our brains are in the moment, so we need to have that instant gratification, that sense of reward that is going to make our brains think, oh my gosh, I like this action, I get rewarded for that. You're going to want to do it again, and eventually when you repeat that habit loop enough times, it will become ingrained, and then it is a habit. So on that note, let's talk about habit trackers, how they work and why they are so effective. So a habit tracker, it tracks your habits. I know, wild, right? There are lots of different ways that you can set up a habit tracker. You can have a paper and pencil version like I've got in my This Time Next Year life planner. That's how that looks, so you can just cross off the habit every day of the week as you complete it. You can get electronic versions with apps that you kind of like cross off digitally the habit every time you do it. You can have marbles in jars, and every time you do the habit you move a marble from one jar into another jar. You could have an old school sticker chart like we used to have in nursery school, and actually now that I say that I feel like I would thrive with one of those. The whole thing is, anytime you complete the habit that you're trying to build, you record it in some way. And this is effective for two main reasons. Number one, if you're anything like me, all of your days blend into one and you can't quite remember what happened today and what happened yesterday and what happened last Thursday. Time has no meaning. So if you make a record of completing your habit each day, then you know for sure that you've actually done it. It helps to make sure that you don't accidentally not do it because you don't know what day of the week it is. And number two, you get that little sense of reward that we were talking about. And I know that you might not think that crossing something off a to-do list or putting an X in a box or ticking something or giving yourself a sticker is going to make that much of a difference. It's not a huge reward, but for your brain it is a sense of completion of a task, a sense of accomplishment, and that is enough. So using a habit tracker is a really easy and effective way of helping you stay on track with the habits you're trying to build. And you know what? If that doesn't work, maybe bring in the big guns. Look, sometimes we are more motivated by punishments than we are with rewards. And I'll be honest, this isn't something that I utilize in my life very often because I like to keep things positive. I like to work towards a good feeling rather than away from a bad one. But we all work differently. And if you find that rewards are just not cutting it and it's just not working for you, then maybe this is something that you want to try instead. In his book, Indestructible, Nir Eyal describes how he wanted to build the habit of working out regularly, but he just kept making excuses and not doing it, and I think we can all relate to that, honestly. So he made a pact with himself that every time he skipped a workout, he would burn $100. And he didn't mean figuratively, he meant literally. So he put up a calendar on his desk where he marked off all of his workouts for the month, and then he taped a $100 bill to the calendar and set a lighter next to it. And he knew that if he didn't do one of those workouts that he was going to have to take that dollar bill and burn it. And that might be a little extreme, but guess what? He stopped making excuses and he didn't skip a workout. Not necessarily saying that you should burn $100. I'm just saying that if rewards aren't working for you, maybe it's time to branch out and try some kind of consequence or ultimatum like that might be a little bit more motivating. Now let's talk a little bit about Habit Stacker, which has honestly been such a game changer for me in my life. Habit stacking is essentially taking the new habit that you're trying to build and pairing it up with a habit that you already have so that one can piggyback off of the other. With habit stacking, the new habit can happen before the old habit, during the old habit, or after the old habit. For example, I will read for 30 minutes before I turn out my lights and go to sleep. I will listen to a personal development podcast as I drive home from work. I'll go for a run after I finish the dishes. The reason I love this is because you don't have to think about when you're going to fit your new habits into the day. You have a built-in cue for your habit loop. And since you already have one habit on the go, it's just easier to build on top of that. And if you continue to stack your habits this way, eventually you'll end up with routines that play out throughout the day without you having to really even think about them or convince yourself to get up and do the things. Actually, after you've been doing a habit for a while, it's harder to not do the habit than it is to do the habit. And I know that sounds like it couldn't possibly be true, because how is it harder to not get up at 6 a.m. than it is to get up at 6 a.m? How is it harder to not go for a run than it is to go for a run? But the truth is, our brains just love repetition. Our brains just thrive on habits. And once you've been doing something for a while, you will just do it automatically. You don't think about it anymore. You just know it's time to do the thing, and you just subconsciously do it. Now let's talk about the age-old question: how long does it take to create a habit? If you Google how long does it take to build a habit, you'll see anything from 21 days to a month to 3 months to everything in between. And the truth is, there's no definitive answer because we're all different and all the habits that we're trying to build are different too. Some things are going to be easier and quicker to grasp than others, and that's okay. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter how long it takes. The only thing that matters is that you stick to it. And here's the thing: You actually have to stick with it, even if it feels like you're not seeing any change, even if it feels like nothing is happening, even if you are frustrated and you're over it and you want to give up, you must stick to it. Because there's this thing called the plateau of latent potential, and it is another absolute gem that I picked out of James Clear's book. Basically, the plateau of latent potential describes the lag time between you making a change and seeing the results of that change. So you start a new habit, you stick with it, days go by, weeks, months maybe, and you're not seeing any difference, nothing is happening. Maybe you're working out and you're not seeing any change on the scale, or you're learning Spanish but the words just aren't clicking in your brain, and after a while you start to think, oh my gosh, what a scam, this is not working, this is not happening for me, maybe I'm doing something wrong, maybe it's never going to work, I'm just going to give up. But the truth is, there's this period of time after you make a change where it seems like nothing is happening. There are no visible results, but you have to stick with it. You have to break through that plateau of latent potential to see the fruits of your labor. It's like if you're trying to boil a pot of water, right? It doesn't boil immediately when you turn the stove on. Now, in the time between you turning on the stove and the water boiling, it's not that no change is happening. That water is getting hotter and hotter. You just can't see it yet. And it's exactly like that when you're building a habit. So my number one piece of advice is don't give up, stick with it, even if it starts to get frustrating, even if you think, why am I not seeing the results that I want to see? You will, it just takes time. Stick with it, keep going, and you will be amazed by the incredible impact that small daily actions can have on your life. And with that said, my friends, please remember that you are enough just as you are. I love you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye!